speaking of it. And it's also playing with tropes of the Western. I'm calling it an anti-Western, you know? We have these big, broad landscapes, but law enforcement is useless and actually part of the problem. You know, there's not a lot of traditional masculinity. You know, my narrators are a woman and a man in a same-sex relationship. You know, that's not traditional Western. You know, it's a new world. So I was really playing with old narrative ideas in that way. And I also wanted it to be sort of a love letter to that region. The borderlands are quite beautiful. You know, the Sonoran Desert, the Chihuahuan Desert. I wanted to write about, you know, the monsoons that you get in Tucson in the summer, which are really quite extraordinary, and the lush greenery you get in the grasslands outside of Marfa. And also, you know, there's a strange beauty to it in winter as well. Everything frosted over and, you know, ant-like pronghorn huddling in fog. So it was just an opportunity to synthesize all this stuff together. And I'm going to start with chapter 1, which actually begins in Lordsburg, New Mexico, which I don't know if it's right off of I-10, and it's a very significant truck stop town. There are like 3 huge truck stops and about 40 abandoned motels. It's kind of a spooky place. There's a lot of abandonment in that town. So
know exactly where that is.
yeah, I'm sure you've been. If you've traveled through that part of the world, you've probably been to Lordsburg.
That's my home state.
New Mexico is? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What part?
I'm from Santa Fe originally.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's beautiful up there.
Yeah.
All right. So, chapter 1, Blue Rain Canyon. 300 miles from where she would disappear, Mariazul Bautista walked alone in the shadows of Lordsburg, New Mexico. Silhouetted in the pre-dawn light, she shivered against a row of abandoned businesses, cold, boarded-up structures of adobe and rusted steel that had stood empty for decades. She was young, dark brown, her black hair tied into 2 braids. Her clothing was a uniform of pink sweatpants, pink hooded sweatshirt, pink headband, and her sneakers were white. A heavy black backpack hung off her chest and abdomen like a baby, strapped tightly against her body. Her stature was petite, and every now and then she looked over her shoulder down the desolate frontage road behind her. On the interstate, 18-wheelers roared into the magenta west and the sunrise east. 10 hours from Los Angeles and 10 hours from San Antonio, Lordsburg subsisted off the profits of its hundreds of motel rooms and a trio of truck stops. The town's prosperity fixed to the traffic speeding forever along its margins. 90 miles to the south lay Mexico. Driving onto the vacant street, I didn't see Mariazul until I passed by her side. At first glance, she seemed like a teenager on her way to high school, an illusion that vanished the moment she looked at me. In her eyes, I could see stress and terror. She slowed down as my vehicle drifted by, studying the black finish of my hybrid, memorizing my Oregon license plates, vigilant to every detail. A woman so alone, yet a woman almost unstoppable. Almost. I came to a halt and rolled down the front passenger window. Before we could speak, I took a moment to check my appearance in the rearview mirror. Grayness underscored my eyes. The brown roots on my scalp contradicted the blondness of my ponytail. My pale skin burned against my all-black ensemble. Black knee-high boots, black tights, black corduroy skirt, an oversized black t-shirt flowing across my lap like a flag, its golden hem shimmering. I hadn't changed or showered in 2 days. A tattoo of an Alaska cedar sapling graced the surface of my left palm. A corresponding female pine cone nestled inside my palm. As I steadied myself, my tattoo seemed like the only permanent aspect of my appearance. Everything else was fleeting. On the dashboard, the temperature registered 19 degrees Fahrenheit. All night, violent winds had pummeled the motel room door, battering the hinges. From underneath my cigarette-burned blankets, I could almost feel the air devouring the community. Before my departure, I had smoked a cigarette on the second-floor balcony, incredulous at the autumn chill. Somewhere, a guard dog was howling at the screech of a freight train, protecting its owner's casita. Checking out of my room and returning to my car, I had indulged in the luxury of heat. a luxury that could amount to survival if shared. Now, this woman on the sidewalk, halted by the window, her breath crystallizing in the air, looked at me. Need a ride? I asked. She stared, saying nothing. I opened the door, patting on the seat and gesturing in the direction she was traveling. Truck stop? I asked. She looked down the street again. Chills were visible across her skin. Her teeth were chattering. Finally, she came to a verdict. Yes, she said. Truck stop. Yes, thank you. She stepped into my car, closing the door behind her, and rolled up the window. Her eyes widened at the self-warming seat. Thank you, she said again. I nodded. She buckled her seatbelt. For the 2-minute ride to the nearest truck stop, she kept one hand on the door handle, the other on the backpack. As we pulled up to a fuel pump, she stared at the Border Patrol van in front of the Tex-Mex restaurant attached to the convenience store. The van's green stripe glinted like a blade against its white surface. Mariazul turned to me. Texas, she said. ¿A dónde vas? Please. For several seconds, I drummed my fingertips on the steering wheel, unsure what to say. Finally, I reached behind my seat to pull out an atlas of the continental United States. Mariazul took the atlas from me, opening to a section dividing the Lone Star State into 5 regions: Trans-Pecos, the Panhandle, Central Texas, East Texas, and South Texas. She turned to the Trans-Pecos region, placing the tip of her index finger where westernmost Texas met New Mexico. El Paso, I said. She nodded. DC, Texas, El Paso. Drive to El Paso? I stared. For a moment, fear flashed across her eyes. Taking out my smartphone, I pulled up a translation app and typed out a message in English. I read aloud the results in Spanish. Me voy a Rosadero, pero yo puedo parar en El Paso. ¿Cuál es la dirección? She stared. Rosadero? You drive to Rosadero, Texas? I nodded. She unzipped the front pocket of her backpack, extracting a business card and passing it to me. On the front side of the card was a picture of an orange brick motel sitting on a hill of yellow desert grass. On the back of the card, white letters on a black playground listed a name and address, along with a phone number. I studied the card in disbelief. The Selenia Inn, 1600 U.S. 90, Rosadero, Texas, 79843. And then there's a phone number. I passed the card back, then typed out another message. Sí, es la verdad, no hay problema. Mariazul's expression brightened. She unzipped the backpack, reaching into its depths and pulling out a brown wallet, torn and held together by duct tape. I can pay, she says. Dollars, how much? No, gracias, I said. No money, no money. No es necesario. Deciding to accept my words, she took out a small golden crucifix necklace hidden beneath her hoodie, closed her eyes, and whispered a prayer to her creator. I turned away, trying to provide privacy. When she was done crossing herself, she returned her attention to me. I remembered we still had not introduced ourselves. I tried to draw on the rudimentary Spanish retained in high school. Mi nombre es Ana, I said. ¿Cómo se llama? Mariazul, she said. Mucho gusto, I said. Yes, okay, she said. Later, I'd find her full name written on a white navel stitched inside her backpack. Someday I would learn that her mother named her after nature, a name she carried with her to far distant places that looked nothing and felt nothing like home. You want breakfast? I asked. She nodded. Huevos rancheros. Thank you. She took out the frayed wallet again, passing me several crumpled dollar bills. I left her alone in the hybrid, crossing the cold parking lot quickly and stepping into the store. Inside, 3 Border Patrol agents were congregating around the coffee machine, filling their thermoses, laughing. They were all men, heavy-set but strong, all Latino, with trim-gelled hair. At the counter, I placed in orders for huevos rancheros, then left to use the restroom. A poster outside the women's room detailed warning signs of human trafficking in several languages, with a 1-800 number to call to report suspicious activity. Upon my return to the food counter, the 3 border agents were gone. Waiting to pick up Mariazul's breakfast, I looked out the window, checking for her outline in my car. She was still there. I couldn't believe it, any of it. Receiving the huevos rancheros in a cardboard takeout container, I approached the cash register. Copies of the Hidalgo County newspaper sat in a stack by the scanner. The front page headline was about a notorious Japanese internment camp in the area during the 1940s. I read the first few sentences before realizing the cashier in front of me, a large young woman dressed in the truck stop's red and yellow uniform, had nodded off, though she continued to stand upright. Her breathing was heavy, as though she were in a trance. She stood there until her manager shook her shoulder. Elongated mirages melted across the eastern sky, a range of phantom mountains vanishing into dawn. 2 hours after leaving the truck stop, southern New Mexico broke into Texas, erupting into the strip malls and interchanges of El Paso. As we drove through the city, Mariazul stared at Ciudad Juarez rising on the other side of the international fence. She looked up at the cinder block houses, her hand on the window as though trying to touch the craggy neighborhoods. Most of the hillside shacks were tagged with graffiti and coated in dust. Razor wire encircled the yards, piled tires and sheet metal forming makeshift defense barriers. On the other side of downtown El Paso, Juarez opened into a huge industrial valley, an iron bar of smog hovering over the export manufacturing plants, sprawling in every direction. For a moment, Mariazul turned to me as though she had something she wanted to say, but she said nothing. The Sierra Blanca Border Patrol checkpoint funneled interstate traffic into an outdoor shelter between the hills of Hudspeth County, contracting countryside of yucca and dry soil into the architecture of security. Mariazul, who had been asleep, looked out at the idling line of semi-trucks and passenger vehicles. She was expressionless. My hybrid stopped in front of a small army of surveillance cameras and orange cones. An agent standing in front of a security booth gestured for me to come forward. As I complied, a flash indicated that my license plates had been photographed. The border agent smiled at us with practiced warmth. His uniform tag identified him as Agent Gallegos. "Morning, ladies. Where are you traveling today?" "Rosadero," I said. The agent nodded at Mariazul. She glanced at me before answering. "Yes, sir," Mariazul said. "Rosadero." "Are you a citizen of the United States?" Agent Gallegos asked me. "Yes, sir," I said. "Is she?" he asked. My heart raced. Before I could say another word, he asked us to produce identification. Fingers trembling, I passed my driver's license. The agent waited while Mariazul took out her broken wallet and extracted a permanent resident card. Taking an ultraviolet LED flashlight off his belt, the agent examined our documents with a severe expression. Behind him, a second agent stood beneath a framed black and white photograph of a young, clean-shaven man in Border Patrol uniform and a cowboy hat. Beneath the framed photograph lay dozens of flowers, cards, prayer candles. The agent standing under the portrait was a woman, the only one in uniform at the checkpoint, with pale skin and a diminutive face, her frizzy brown hair tied into a ponytail. She stood with tense focus, unaware of the traffic crawling through her station. Agent Gallegos turned to her. "Agent Taylor, would you mind coming over here?" he asked. The woman known as Agent Taylor looked at us. She stepped away from the shrine to inspect our IDs. She looked at Mariazul. All three of us waited. "Miss Bautista's document appears to be authentic," Agent Gallegos said. "A resident of Tucson, Arizona. Says here she was granted asylum more than a year ago. See anything wrong?" Agent Taylor took out a pair of mirrored sunglasses and covered her face. Agent Gallegos sighed. He returned our IDs. "Thank you, ladies. Drive safe." I nodded. Exiting the inspection area, I reaccelerated to highway speed in slow, cautious increments. As the checkpoint disappeared around the mountains, I thought I could see Agent Taylor still watching after us. Leaning against the window, Mariazul fell asleep. 30 minutes later, we were sitting on a picnic table in front of a truck stop outside the town of Van Horn. I smoked a cigarette, watching dark clouds gather in the sky, draining the redness out of the desert. Mariazul sipped from a bottle of water, wiping her lips and looking back at the interstate traffic turning along the dusty hills. Above us, the denuded branches of an oak tree stretched into a pantomime of shelter. Across the decaying highway stood an abandoned feed store. We were 74 miles from Rosadero. Mariazul rescrewed the plastic cap onto her water bottle. She tapped me on the shoulder. Telephone? To write English. I passed her my smartphone. She typed the question she must have wanted to ask since I picked her up in Hidalgo County. Why are you traveling to Rosadero? I let my cigarette burn, thinking about what to say. Mariazul let her leg jiggle against the bench, waiting. I told her the truth. My brother is missing. His name is Jacob. He was last seen in Rosadero 10 days ago. Nobody knows where he is. The police say he was kidnapped. I love him very much. Mariazul sat with my words. She took a deep breath and transmitted something in return. Passing my phone back a final time, she looked away. My brother is missing too. His name is Alejandro. Neither of us spoke. Finishing my cigarette, I communicated it was time to leave. Mariazul returned inside my hybrid, buckling our seatbelts as heat recirculated through the interior. Turning on the engine, we began the final stretch of driving. The truck stop behind us appeared empty in the rearview mirror, inhabited by something realer than ghosts but harder to name. Rows of naked pecan trees stretched into the foothills of Jeff Davis County. Tucked behind the orchard, a freight train whistled and rumbled. On the other side of the highway, abandoned trailers popped out of grazing land. 40 minutes out of Van Horn, a sign popped up announcing the next town, Bouvois, Texas, population 98. Up and down the highway, Bouvois seemed to comprise rusting trailers and sagging desert cottages. Not a single one of the alleged 98 residents was in sight. Halfway through the ghost town, a white cruiser with a green stripe sped up behind us, turning on its roof lights. I pulled over in front of an abandoned casita with a front door that had fallen off its hinges. Two withered magueys stood on either side of its entrance. Nobody, it seemed, had been home in years. The Border Patrol cruiser screeched to a halt, kicking up dust like a plume of smoke. Out of the plume, Agent Taylor from the Sierra Blanca checkpoint jumped onto the road. She sprinted up the passenger side of my hybrid, frizzy brown hair ponytail bobbing behind her, service weapon drawn. Tapping on Mariazul's window with her pistol, the agent ordered me to unlock the door. I obeyed. The agent pulled the door open and seized Mariazul by the arm, yelling for me to keep my hands on the wheel. She yanked Mariazul out of her seat, the seatbelt bursting out of its receiver, almost striking her in the eye. As Mariazul cried out, Agent Taylor forced the backpack off her shoulders, discarding it into the dirt and gravel. Brandishing her pistol again, Agent Taylor screamed at me to keep my eyes straight. I complied, listening to the clink of handcuffs around Mariazul's wrists. Seeing her in my peripheral vision led into the cruiser still flashing behind me. Agent Taylor slammed the door in condemnation. She looked at me with intensity and disappeared into her cruiser, screeching onto the highway before pulling a tight U-turn and speeding back towards the interstate. The ghost town was silent. For several minutes, I remained in a paralytic fog, my hand still clenching the steering wheel. Eventually, returning to my senses, I looked out of the open passenger door. Mariazul's backpack still lay on the ground, along with a golden crucifix. Sometime during her arrest, her necklace must have broken away, sacrificed to the desert like so many anonymous articles of faith. As I regained power over myself, I took out my cell phone. I had no signal. There was nobody I could call. All I had were Mariazul's last known possessions. Stepping out of the hybrid at last, I walked around to the backpack and crucifix. Not knowing what else to do, I placed her belongings on her seat. Closing the door, I looked at the abandoned casita. Behind the open doorway, I could see a dim room. In desperate pursuit of help, I stepped inside. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness. Slowly, the interior of the casita began to take form. Torn-up rugs lay on a primitive dirt floor, covered in rodent tracks defiled by guano and bird droppings. In one corner of the living room, a pack rat nest glistened with urine. Plastic toy soldiers lay at angles they might occupy for 1,000 years. On the walls, most of the coffee-colored paint had peeled away, revealing rough blocks of adobe. On either side of the fireplace hung two sepia-toned portraits, one of Benito Juarez, reserved and statesmanlike, the other of Emiliano Zapata, youthful and determined under his sombrero. Above, the tin roof began to reverberate with rain. I walked back to my car and resumed my place behind the steering wheel. There was nothing else I could do. Activating my left turn signal, I rejoined the highway. A few yards from Bouvois' southern edge, a green metal sign informed me I was leaving Jeff Davis County and entering Narvaez County. 10 minutes outside the ghost town, I passed an unmarked white blimp moored to a circular runway, protected by a razor wire fence and flashing lights. Signs in English and Spanish warned away potential trespassers. Through an intelligence matrix I could not begin to understand, I believed the blimp had somehow foreseen the entire course of my morning, monitoring my role in the young woman's passage from Lordsburg into the back seat of Agent Taylor's cruiser. Perhaps the blimp had intercepted my phone signal, short-circuiting my line of communication to the Pacific Northwest. I would never know. Blue slivers of light filled the sky. I would not encounter another soul for 40 minutes. And that's the passage I've been practicing for